It's the most bizarre story you can hear about a haunted house. This story is true and it happened in Tunisia, and it was published by government newspapers. This story is told by a sheikh who is called El Boghdady, and he says that it's one of the strangest things that happened to him with the jinn. And this story became famous among people at that time, so that some newspapers published it after the death of the sheikh in a strange way. Sheikh Abd El Boghdady says, I was invited along with another sheikh to an old house, and we were invited to recite some of the Qur'an, as the residents of the house claimed that strange things happened with them, and the house was so old that when you look at it, you think it will fall at any moment. The residents of the house were in poor financial condition and were suffering from extreme poverty. The family consists of a widow mother and two sons, and one of them, the eldest son, was suffering from insanity, and when the mother asked about the reason, she says that her son was in good health and mentally sound. And one day he entered the basement in an area in the lands next to the house, and then he suddenly disappeared, and he wasn't found until after a period of more than 2 years, and he was out of his mind and suffering from seizures of epilepsy. And the mother says that strange events are happening in her house and she and her sons have no other place to turn to. When the mother is asked about the strange events, she says that people appear in her house and strange sounds emanate from under the floor and from the walls, and that they always find hair and dirt in the food. And she says that one day she was with her sons and a neighbor in the house, and they saw naked people without legs floating above. And the youngest son said that he lost one of his teeth in a strange accident. And he says, I was in one of the rooms praying el-magid, and when I left the room, I was intercepted by a black cat of a strange shape, and it was sleeping with his head turned opposite his body in a very strange way. I thought it was dead, so I poked it with a stick. It moved, so I hit it out of fright. So it looked at me and spoke in a strange language. Then it ran towards the kitchen and disappeared into the darkness. And when I followed it, I found no trace of it. So I slept that night and dreamed that I was praying, and I came out of the room to find an old man with long arms and very dark skin. So he hit me with his crutch and said, you found me asleep, so you hit me. He was very angry. So I woke up terrified, and my teeth were broken and blood was dripping from my mouth. And the son tells another situation and says, I was asleep on a winter night and I heard someone calling me and knocking on the door. So I woke up, opened the door, and I didn't find anyone. So I went back to sleep, and I hadn't slept yet. So I heard the knocking again, and it was stronger and the call became louder. So I went quickly and didn't find anyone. I was surprised. I went back to the room, but I couldn't sleep, and I kept thinking about what was happening. And then I heard it again, but it was louder this time. And here I became clear that the sound wasn't coming from the door of the house, but coming from the door of the closet. So I stayed in my place and popped my eyes, and I couldn't close them, and kept staring at the closet. And the door opened, and a bald, skinny man came out breathing in a strange way, his eyes shining in the dark like the eyes of an animal. And he had no hair except for thick hair surrounding his waist, covering his private parts. And he was walking on his hands and feet. I closed my eyes with difficulty, and my limbs froze until I heard him leave my room. I didn't sleep that night and didn't move from my place. The sheikh says we were surprised by his words, and I consulted with Sheikh Eljoraidy, and we agreed to start reciting the Qur'an. And it was night, and as soon as we started, the electricity went out. We heard people walking around us, and we didn't stop until the lights came back on. And we found footprints stained with impurity on the ceiling of the house. And this was the strangest thing I have seen in my life. And whenever we started to recite the Qur'an, the situation would repeat itself until we finished a part of the Qur'an. So we looked at the mother, and the features of sadness covered her face. So we told her to go to a neighbor's house the next day and stay with them until we finished the recitation, and that her youngest son stay with us. Indeed, we went back to our homes, and the next day we returned to this strange house. And the mother had gone with her eldest son to one of the neighbors' houses, and her youngest son stayed with us. So we started reciting, and it was only a few minutes until the son passed out. So I put my hand on his head and continued my recitation, and it was only a few more minutes until we heard strange laughter like dogs barking in the voice of an old man coming from under the ground. I stopped reciting, and Sheikh Eljoraidy continued reciting. I brought my ears close to to the ground, and I heard clear laughter, and the voice was arousing chest tightness. So I asked, "Who are you?" He didn't answer, and his voice became louder. So I asked God for forgiveness and repeated the question. Indeed, his voice increased. So I cursed him. So he said, "Get out of my land." Then the sound began to appear at times and disappear at other times. Minutes later, the son woke up and was vomiting, and threads and hair were coming out of his mouth. And the days passed like this. And we used to come to this house and recite the Qur'an, but the strange events didn't stop. The Sheikh says, one day we were reciting the Qur'an and only the youngest son was with us. So the mother entered us and asked permission to enter the bathroom. It was located in the last corner of the house that no one entered it or left it except by passing by us. So the mother entered the bathroom and we stopped reciting so as not to hear the words of God in an unclean place. We heard the knock on the door of the house, so I went out to be surprised that it was the mother who was at the door. The Sheikh says that one day Sheikh Eljoraidy and I had stopped reciting to rest for a while. So I slept, and when I woke up I didn't find anyone in the house, and the sun had set and it was dark. And I heard whispers coming from all directions, and whenever I looked at one of the rooms I saw people looking at me in the dark. Whenever I entered a room and said, "In the name of Allah," I didn't find anyone. So I left the house, and the next day I asked Sheikh Eljoraidy why he didn't wake me up. He said that I asked him for permission to return home and left before him, and the mother said that she returned and found no one but her son in the house. The Sheikh says, one night I saw in my dream that I was entering a dark narrow basement as narrow as a grave near the house of this family. I was surprised the next day that Sheikh Eljoraidy had seen the same dream. So we asked the mother and she said, "This is the hole that my son entered before he disappeared." So I consulted with the Sheikh that we should enter it, hoping that we would find in it something that would help us in this problem, or that would answer our questions. After the Fajr prayer, the next day we went and the mother was guiding us towards the basement. So I went down first, then the Sheikh followed me after we told the mother to go back to her house. The place was dark and cramped. We had a flashlight, but the strange thing was that its light didn't illuminate the place at all, and the basement had a low ceiling as you had to bend down to be able to walk, and we saw a light coming from the end of it. The Sheikh says we kept walking for a period not exceeding 10 minutes, only to be surprised upon our exit that the morning had turned into night, and that we were in a barren desert area, and when we looked at the exit, we found it buried by sand. Sheikh Eljoraidy tried to dig but no avail, as if the hole didn't exist, so we knew that this is what the Jinn did, and that this basement is one of the entrances to the world of the Jinn. Sand dunes surrounded us from all directions, except for one direction in which we could see houses made of mud within sight, and the flames of fire radiated from them. So we went towards it, and it was at a distance not far. So we walked and hurried our steps, but the closer we got, the farther the houses became, until we got tired. But we continued walking, asking for forgiveness from Allah until we began to approach. And as soon as we approached, we heard the sound of flutes, the beating of drums, and singing as if animals were howling. And when we arrived, we found naked people dancing around a burning fire. But they had no shadow resulting from the light of the fire, and their feet didn't leave a mark on the sand. So we knew that they were from the Jinn. One of them came rushing, and he was strange in face with harsh features, as if his features were slowly changing their place. And he said, "Sit down." We didn't speak, and the Sheikh said I was about to sit down, so I said, "In the name of Allah." So the noise disappeared, and everyone around us had disappeared, even the houses. So we asked for forgiveness from Allah, and then we heard the hooves of an animal. So we turned behind us to find a fat man, and he was wearing a crown of wood studded with insects on his head, riding a dark black camel that had no color other than black. The man said, his voice shaking the earth beneath us, "What brought you both to this wilderness? Did you not know that it's forbidden to the humans?" We told him our story, and he said, "You have nothing to do with them. Their son, we took revenge on him because he came to one of us and harmed him, and their house belonged to us before them. So they came and lived in it. and we are only nations like you, so go back and you will be safe. The Sheikh says we were not able to do anything, and we told him that the entrance had disappeared. So he said, go back and find it and never look back, otherwise you will be regretful. So we went back to find an animal with the body of a dog and the head of a human digging in the ground, and as soon as the exit was clear, he came out of it running. So I went down before Sheikh Eljoraidy with my head bowed and walking in the dark, and the Sheikh followed me behind me until we were about to leave. I heard Eljoraidy calling out his mother's name as if he could hear her called him, and then I heard his screams and his voice suddenly calmed down. So I refused to turn around and thought it was the act of the Jinn. So I went out and waited for him for a long time, but he didn't come out. Imam Eljoraidy didn't appear after that at all, and the story spread among the people, and they began to search for the Sheikh, but no one succeeded in finding the basement, and it disappeared from existence. And after a period of time, the house was demolished and people gave alms with their money, so they built a mosque in its place called Jami' Muhammad Eljoraidy, and one of them gave a house to the widow and her children. And the strange thing is that months after this incident, Sheikh Abd el Boghdady was found dead in his house with ants eating his head and limbs removed from his body.